Okay, so here's our final video for topic 310. And remember, I told you this is a huge topic, so it definitely, we've gone through a lot of stuff with President Washington. The first video is him setting up the government. The second one has to do with his domestic disputes and the rise of political parties. And then we have foreign policy disputes for Washington. But now, this final video goes over the presidency of John Adams. And John Adams, he was the first one-term president for the United States. He's the first one who was not reelected. And there have not been very many of those in our history. I think I have to count, it's 9 or 10 is all that we've had that have not been reelected for a second term. But what we're looking at here on our map is the election of John Adams. So what it displays is a trend that is beginning in United States politics. In 1796, we can see a sectional split of the political parties. And when I say sectional, I mean geographic. So we can see the Federalist Party is doing well in the coastal cities. So we can see here, even though these are southern states, North Carolina and Virginia, Maryland, it's the coastal areas that support John Adams. And then in the more rural areas, we can see support for Jefferson, who was a Democratic Republican. And it was a close election, you can see. So the electoral vote ended up being 71 to 68. So a close election. Adams secures the presidency, and then Jefferson will be his vice president. This also is showing our emerging political parties in the United States in 1796. So let's talk about this. John Adams, his presidency is dominated, and I mean dominated, by the issue of the French Revolution and the United States refusing to assist in that. So Washington's statement of neutrality has angered the French, and now John Adams, as the president following Washington, has to deal with the fallout of that. So we have a situation where, the French are upset by the violation of Treaty of Alliance, 1778. The French are also upset that the United States negotiated Jay's Treaty, which was a treaty with England. So they feel like this was a move towards an alliance with England. Don't know why that's going backwards. So French warships are attacking U.S. merchant ships, and they are impressing U.S. sailors. And this is basically an action to stop any kind of support or trade from assisting their enemy, Britain, Great Britain. And the U.S. has not allowed this to go completely unchecked, right? So the U.S. captured over 80 French ships in response, but they did lose about several hundred to France. So this is a bad situation for a president to come into, right? This is what Adams is coming into. These two nations are on the brink of war. This is the situation. So Adams decides in the early year of his presidency to send a group of diplomats to France, right? So he sends a delegation to France, and his hope is to try talking and diplomacy to avoid war, right? So this delegation goes to France, and the representatives of the United States were snubbed by the French government. And what this means is nobody would speak to them. So they go to France. They're trying to get an audience with decision makers. Nobody will speak to them. So they're given the silent treatment. But eventually, there's 3 French representatives, and they keep their names quiet. So they're known as X, Y, and Z, because we don't know who they are. I mean, we know now, but at the time, nobody knew who they were. And so X, Y, and Z reach out to the U.S. delegation and they tell the U.S. delegation, if you pay us $250,000, we will get you a meeting with Talleyrand. And Talleyrand was one of the members of the Directory or Directoire at the time, right? So this is at the point in the French Revolution where King Louis XVI has been executed. We know that happened. And now France is being ruled by the Directory. So Talleyrand is one of those members. So they say, we will get you a meeting, but you need to pay us $250,000 to even talk to him. Okay, so this is an insult to the U.S. delegation. They refuse the demands and they leave France. But, you really want to think about this. The United States is a new country and kind of has a chip on its shoulder, right? The people of the United States, they want to be recognized as independent. They want to be treated the same as any other nation would be. So to be dismissed and bribed like this, they feel like school children or something. So they are insulted, like their pride is insulted. So they refuse and they leave. They come back to the U.S. And at this point, this story of the XYZ affair is published in the U.S. newspapers. And at this point, the U.S. and French begin fighting an undeclared naval war. And this is called the quasi-war. So it's the almost war. So they're not fighting on land. It's not declared, but they begin attacking each other's ships. So this quasi-war lasts for about 2 years, from 1797 to 1799. So if you remember the years, John Adams was elected in 1796. And so he begins his presidency in the spring of 1797. So this is the first 2 years of his, early 2 years of his presidential term. And many of the American citizens want war, right? This angers the Americans, the average American citizen. And the rallying cry in the United States becomes millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute. So the people of the U.S. are willing to pay taxes and provide millions of dollars to defend the country, but they will not pay for that bribe, right? They will not pay tribute or a bribe to go talk to Talleyrand. And so the U.S. prepares for war, expands the Navy, and this is where the United States creates the Marine Corps, right? Marine, ocean, right? So the Marine Corps is created to try to prepare and defend this new country. And this had political effects in the United States. So, stupid camera. This had political effects in the United States because in 1798, there is an election, right? This is the midterm election. So Adams is elected in 1796. In 1798, you have a midterm election. So the president isn't on the ballot, but the House of Representatives and a third of the senators are. And so in this election, because everybody was so angry at France, the Federalists made huge gains enough in Congress that they could control both the House of Representatives and the Senate. And so the Federalists saw an opportunity here to strengthen their party long term. So what they did is they enacted some laws to begin to restrict the Democratic Republicans. And so these laws that they enacted, they passed a new Naturalization Act. And this was an act that outlined the steps to becoming a citizen. So this new Naturalization Act increased the amount of time for an immigrant to become a citizen from 5 years to 14 years. And so this helps the Federalists because a lot of new immigrants to the United States, they were coming into the U.S. and then they were claiming the cheap land that's available in the West, and they're living in rural areas, and they tended to support the Democratic Republicans. So the Federalists wanted to extend the amount of time before those immigrants could become voting citizens. Okay, they also passed an Alien Act, which authorized the president to deport aliens that are considered dangerous and to detain alien enemies or enemy aliens in time of war. And the Democratic Republicans felt like this was not so much about security. They thought maybe these Federalists were trying to pass a law to deport political enemies, right? So people who might feel differently than them politically. And so they felt like this was also a jab at the Democratic Republicans. And then the last one is the Sedition Act, which was a law that made it illegal for newspaper editors to criticize the president or Congress, and it imposed fines for violators. So it's a law that restricts the speech of newspaper editors or newspaper publishers and makes it illegal for them to criticize the government, which I would say personally is a clear violation of the First Amendment, right? The First Amendment or freedom of speech protects us from government suppression of speech. So if the government can impose fines for printing something that's against them politically, this is a violation of the First Amendment. Yeah, these are called the Alien and Sedition Acts. And they ended up being kind of a flashpoint for President Adams, and definitely led to him not being reelected. So the Federalists maybe got a little too big for their britches when they won this the majorities of the House and Senate. So the response to the Alien and Sedition Acts were something called the Kentucky and Virginia Resolutions. And so these were written by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. So what these were resolutions. They were written under a pen name, by the way. So they were published from the state of Kentucky and from the state of Virginia, but they weren't signed by Jefferson or Madison. So people didn't know who wrote them until after the fact. But what they said is basically that the Alien and Sedition Acts were unconstitutional. Therefore, the states could nullify or cancel a law, right? So they're using something that they call the doctrine of nullification. They say since the states created the national government, the states also have the right to nullify, cancel, or decide not to obey a law they believe is unconstitutional. So this is our first big conflict in the United States between states' rights and national government power. So this is a theme. This is eventually like this doctrine of nullification will eventually hit its peak at the U.S. Civil War when states decide to secede from the Union. They nullify basically their entrance into the United States. So this is kind of like a first step, even though this isn't directly related to the issue of slavery or the secession of Southern states, but it is this doctrine of nullification that underlies that whole issue. There's my mouse. This was all based on something called compact theory. So Jefferson and Madison, they believe that the reason that states can nullify national government laws is because the states had created the national government, and the states had entered into this compact or this agreement voluntarily. So they say they have the right to refuse to obey the laws if they are unconstitutional. In general, the kind of general belief on this doctrine of nullification at this point is that it would be too inefficient if states could nullify any law they find unconstitutional. So eventually this power of nullification is kind of housed under the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court has not claimed this power yet. It will eventually be the Supreme Court that is going to be the decider of whether a law is constitutional or unconstitutional. But that hasn't happened yet. So what we're seeing here is a situation where these people have these political beliefs, and they're kind of fighting it out to try to decide who is it that draws a line if the government goes too far and makes a law that's unconstitutional. So under the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, they say the states will do it. This will be replaced by something called judicial review. But that, like I said, not until 1803. So this is a little bit harder. So what happens for John Adams here is, the Federalists had enjoyed a high period in 1798, but he still has some decisions to make. And so he's getting pressure from within his party. Alexander Hamilton wants war against France. Okay, the reason he wants that war is because Hamilton believes that the war is going to make the country rich, right? If you go to war, you have to pay soldiers who will spend their money. You have to pay businesses to supply the troops. All this stuff adds up. You have to pay farmers to grow food for the troops, for example. It all adds up into a booming economy. And so Hamilton, he's like, yeah, let's go to war. But Adams, the other leader of the Federalist Party, doesn't believe the country is strong enough yet. And honestly, as president, I think Adams probably has a pretty good understanding of exactly how strong or not strong the United States is, because as president, you're privy to quite a lot of information. So he believes the country is not strong enough yet. And the Federalists are losing support by 1799 because building up the military in preparation for war is costing a lot of money. And so they're losing support because people are not wanting to pay these taxes. And if Adams had gone to war against France, that would make him like a wartime president. He would have a little bit more popularity and support because he's the leader of the military in the country during wartime. But, right, it says right here, a successful war would boost your support for the Federalists. But Adams decides ultimately that he's going to avoid war with France. And this decision possibly cost him his re-election, which is why this slide says patriotism above party. He made a decision that he knew was going to be unpopular, but what he felt was best for the country, which probably had some major effects for him. So he lost the election in 1800, and in that election in 1800, we get a final rise of the political parties, the first political party system. Sorry, let me get that up there. So I'm not going to read through this, but I'll leave it here for a minute, and you can pause it if you would like to. It's similar to what we've seen in the other videos when I compared the political parties. But you would say, like, at the election of Adams, the political parties were definitely emerging, but maybe not completely set. We hadn't completely finished evolving into this two-party system. But by the election of 1800, there's solidly two parties at play here. And from this point forward, our national politics will be dominated by a two-party system that occasionally has a third-party challenger. So one of the threads we trace throughout U.S. history is the development of this third-party system. So this one right here, the Federalists and Democratic Republicans, this is the first of the two-party systems, right? This is the first party system in the United States. It will be replaced. The Federalists are going to wane. There is not another Federalist president elected. So the Federalists will wane. And the next party system that we will see, the second party system will be the Democratic Republicans, and they'll actually drop the name Republicans. So they'll become the Jacksonian Democrats or Democrats versus the Whigs. So Federalists will change to the Whigs. and then the Democrat name is going to stay. And then in 1856 to 1860, it's a process, the Whig Party will fall out of favor and they'll be replaced with the Republican Party. And from 1860 forward, we have Republican and Democrat. And then what we see following 1860 is the names don't change, but the things that they support and the way they line up will change. And so we have basically 5 party systems in our U.S. history, and the current party system we're in is possibly going to be called the 6th party system, and it started around 1968. However, when you're living in it, you don't know what it is, right? So as we get farther from 1968, in time, in chronology, it will become clearer if that was a true party shift or realignment. So this is one of those threads through history that I find pretty fascinating. So this is the first party system. And then as we lead into the election of 1800, we will see John Adams versus Thomas Jefferson again. So it's the same candidates for presidency as in 1796, but this time Thomas Jefferson wins. And so you can see where before we had pretty strong Federalist support in this in the Northeast and in these coastal cities, it's starting to wane a little bit. Still a close election, but not as close as 1796. Jefferson wins, and what this represents is the first time in U.S. history we have a transfer of power from one political party to the other political party, right? So this is the first time that the presidency flips to another political party, and so Adams, he's a little salty about it. He does he did write to Thomas Jefferson a telegram, but then he left the night before Jefferson came into the Capitol to be sworn in. He didn't stay for Jefferson's inauguration, and he left and didn't want to be there for the transfer itself. But we're going to talk a little bit more about this election in the next topic. This is the end of time period 3, 1800. So when we get into time period 4, it starts up with this election and the election of Jefferson. So we'll talk about the tone and tenor of this election. It was nasty, nasty, nasty. Considered one of the worst elections in our history. In fact, in 2016, when Trump and Clinton ran against one another, that was a nasty election. And guess what election that people compared it to? The election of 1800. So nasty elections in tone. The candidates weren't nice to each other. So we will talk about that as we move on. But we aren't quite done with time period 3. We still want to look at some of the broad trends throughout the entire time period before we move on to this Jeffersonian era. So happy studying, APUSH. This is the last one for topic 3.10. So I want you to take a look at your note sheet. Make sure that you have the information you need. Go through your textbook if you need to fill in a few gaps. And we'll see you in class.